Blue John Canyon. On April 26, 2003, Aaron Ralston, a mechanical engineer and passionate climber, began a solo expedition in Blue John Canyon, USA, without telling anyone where he was going. At around 11 a.m., Aaron reached the highest part of the canyon. In front of him was a deep, narrow crevice. On the other side, a large rock jutted out and looked stable. Believing it was safe, Aaron decided to jump across, but the moment he landed, the rock suddenly shifted, causing him to slip and fall into the gap. Even worse, the massive boulder fell with him and crushed his right arm against the canyon wall, trapping him completely and making it impossible to pull free. In this desperate situation, Aaron had very little food and water, and only a multi-tool knife. For the first 3 days, he tried everything he could to escape, chiseling at the rock with his knife, attempting to build a pulley system using his climbing rope. But the boulder, weighing hundreds of kilograms, didn't move at all. As his water supply ran out, he was forced to drink his own urine to stay alive. By the 4th day, believing death was near, he carved into the canyon wall his name, birth date, and the date he expected to die. He also recorded farewell videos for his family, a final goodbye. But on the 5th day, something strange happened. Aaron experienced an incredibly vivid hallucination of himself playing with a future child, even though he was missing part of his arm. That vision convinced him that he still had a chance to survive. On the morning of the 6th day, after 127 hours trapped, Aaron's survival instincts kicked in with full force. He realized that if he didn't act immediately, he would die. Aaron made an unthinkable decision. He used leverage to break the bones in his arm, snapping both the radius and ulna. Then, through nearly an hour of unbearable pain, he used his multi-tool to cut off his right arm, finally freeing himself from the boulder. But that was only the beginning. Aaron still had to rappel down a cliff nearly 19 meters using only one arm, and then walk about 3 kilometers, despite having lost nearly 38% of his blood. Fortunately, he was discovered by a Dutch family of hikers, who quickly called for help. Aaron was rescued by helicopter and rushed to the hospital in time, escaping death by the narrowest margin.
Ciula Grande Peak. On June 6, 1985, Joe Simpson, 25 years old, and his climbing partner, Simon Yates, successfully reached the summit of Ciula Grande in Peru, 6,344 meters. However, their moment of glory quickly turned into a nightmare during the descent. On the 4th day, Joe slipped and landed badly, causing his tibia to drive into his knee joint and shatter his right leg. In the middle of a snowstorm with no possibility of helicopter rescue, Simon made a desperate decision. He used a rope about 50 meters long to lower Joe down the mountain section by section. This method worked, allowing them to descend nearly 1,000 meters. But as darkness fell and the storm intensified, visibility disappeared. Simon accidentally lowered Joe over the edge of a cliff, leaving him hanging in midair. After more than an hour of holding the rope in hopeless struggle, Simon realized his anchor point was starting to slip. Joe was unable to climb back up the rope, and Simon could not pull him up. To avoid being dragged off the mountain himself, Simon made an unthinkable choice. He cut the rope. Joe plunged into the void. He fell about 120 meters into a crevasse. Miraculously, Joe survived, but he was trapped in complete despair, even considering ending his own life. Yet, instead of surrendering, his survival instinct pushed him to crawl deeper into the darkness in search of a way out. He carefully followed cracks in the rock and eventually found a slope leading back toward the light. Over the next 3 days, Joe endured an impossible journey, traveling nearly 8 kilometers by crawling and hopping on one leg, severely dehydrated, exhausted, and delirious from pain. In the end, he somehow made it back to camp just before Simon was about to leave. A survival miracle, against all odds. 21 days lost in the Amazon rainforest. In early November 1981, Yossi Ginsberg, 22 years old, and 3 strangers ventured deep into the Amazon rainforest with the dream of finding gold. After only a short time, disagreements began to arise. The group of 4 was forced to split into 2. Yossi and a man named Kevin decided to build a crude raft and travel downstream along the Tuichi River, while the other 2 chose to walk upstream through the dense jungle. Tragedy struck when Yossi and Kevin's raft crashed into a powerful waterfall. The raging current caused them to lose all control. The raft was destroyed, and both men were swept away. Kevin managed to swim to shore, but Yossi was carried off by the floodwaters and vanished into the depths of the jungle. Over the next 4 days, Yossi tried desperately to make his way upstream to find Kevin, but it was hopeless. That was when he realized the horrifying truth. He was completely alone in the Amazon. From that moment began his 21-day survival nightmare in the green hell. For 3 weeks, Yossi faced countless life-threatening challenges, nearly drowning in sudden flash floods, sinking deep into jungle swamps, his feet rotting from a severe fungal infection, extreme weakness from starvation, dehydration, and infection. The loneliness and exhaustion slowly broke his mind. Yossi began experiencing vivid hallucinations, even believing that an imaginary woman was with him and sleeping beside him every night, his mind's final defense mechanism to keep him from going insane in the jungle. Just as all hope seemed lost, a miracle happened. Kevin, who believed Yossi was dead, refused to give up. He returned with a rescue team and eventually found Yossi barely alive after more than 3 weeks of searching. Yossi and Kevin were incredibly fortunate to survive and return from the Amazon, but the other 2 members of the expedition disappeared forever and were never found. A nightmare in the outback. On January 23, 2006, Ricky Meiji was driving through a remote area of Australia. Along the way, he decided to give a stranger a ride, but he never imagined that this single decision would lead him into the most terrifying nightmare of his life. The man drugged Ricky. When Ricky woke, he panicked as he realized he was lying alone in the middle of the Tanami Desert. No car, no shoes, no food, and no water. Nothing but scorching heat, blowing sand, and an eerie silence surrounded him. Ricky was forced to walk barefoot for 10 days before he found his first source of water. Starving and severely dehydrated, he had no choice but to eat anything he could catch or gather to stay alive: leeches, grasshoppers, frogs, lizards, and wild plants. He allowed himself only 1 small meal per day, just enough to keep his body from completely collapsing. After 71 days stranded in the desert, Ricky was finally discovered by cattle station workers. By then, he was barely more than a walking skeleton, having lost around 60 kilograms, more than half his body weight. Survived 7 lightning strikes. This is Roy Sullivan, the Guinness World Record holder for being the person struck by lightning the most times in recorded history while still surviving. Over the course of 35 years, from 1942 to 1977, he was struck by lightning 7 times, and each incident left him seriously injured. Strike number 1, 1942. While taking shelter from the rain inside a newly built lookout tower, which did not yet have a lightning rod, Roy watched as the tower was struck by lightning repeatedly, about 7 to 8 times. Panicked, he ran outside, only to be struck by lightning immediately. The electrical current burned a long scar down his right leg, even burning a hole through his shoe. Strike number 2, 1969. In an extremely rare incident, Roy was struck while driving a truck. Lightning hit a tree and then jumped through the open truck window, knocking him unconscious. His hair and eyebrows were completely burned off. The truck lost control and nearly crashed off the road. Strike number 3, 1970. Lightning struck a transformer near his home and then jumped onto Roy while he was standing outside in his yard. The strike caused severe burns on his left shoulder, leaving him in pain for several days. Strike number 4, 1972. This happened at the Shenandoah National Park Ranger Station. Roy was struck again, and his hair caught fire violently. He had to use a wet towel to put out the flames on his head. After this event, he began to believe that some mysterious force was following him. Strike number 5, 1973. Roy noticed a strange storm cloud that seemed to be chasing his vehicle. Thinking he had escaped danger, he stepped out and was immediately struck again. Strike number 6, 1976. While trying to escape from a dark storm cloud, Roy was struck again, this time in the ankle. As if under a repeating curse, his hair caught fire once more. Strike number 7, 1977. The final strike occurred while Roy was fishing. Lightning hit the top of his head, burning his hair, chest, and stomach. The most unbelievable part is that right after being struck, he was still conscious enough to chase away a bear with a stick when it tried to steal his fish. After surviving 7 lightning strikes, something that could kill a person in an instant, Roy Sullivan became deeply traumatized and terrified whenever thunderstorms appeared. Sadly, in 1983, the man who had endured nature's deadly power died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Trapped in the Sahara Desert. In 1994, Mauro Prosperi, 38 years old, an Italian police officer, joined an ultra-marathon across the Sahara Desert in Morocco. During the first few days, everything went smoothly, but on the 4th day, disaster suddenly struck. A violent sandstorm lasting nearly 8 hours erased the race trail completely, blowing away all markers and leaving Mauro totally disoriented. With no food and almost no water, Mauro wandered hopelessly through endless dunes. Worse still, he even saw a rescue helicopter fly overhead, but they never spotted him. In desperation, Mauro found shelter inside an abandoned ancient shrine known as a Marabout shrine. There, he kept himself alive in ways almost impossible to imagine, including drinking his own urine. As the suffering dragged on, Mauro broke mentally. Refusing to die slowly from thirst and starvation, he attempted to take his own life by cutting his wrists. But something strange happened. Because his body was severely dehydrated, his blood had become thick and sluggish, and the wound did not bleed enough to kill him. That failed suicide attempt became a turning point. Mauro began to believe that fate was not ready to let him die. Regaining his will to survive, he left the shrine and kept walking through the Sahara. After 9 days missing, having wandered more than 290 kilometers, Mauro was finally found in a near-death condition, suffering from severe liver failure and weighing only about 45 kilograms.